I'm excited because I could talk to anybody about how to write an email. I could talk to anybody about how to cold call. There are only a few folks that have had a chance to open up a new market for a company like Canva and be part of a journey from 500 to 4,000 employees. So John, I'm super excited to have you on the show and to be talking about opening up a new market. So John, I want to help me understand the decision to go to Canva. It's a huge opportunity. It's a great company, a great set of founders, but the undertaking of opening up a new office for a company is massive. Help me understand your decision process and what went into saying yes to Canva.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was, in a lot of ways, probably the easiest decision. But to your point, there was, a lot of reasons it should have been one of the harder decisions. I think the unique things for me in this, Colin, were that it was outside of probably the normal things I had done. It was, Canva was largely B2C focused, and I had predominantly done B2B throughout my career. So, I came into this with a little bit of, I would say, skepticism, even when I went to meet with the founders. Around if my, if my skills really would fit and resonate with them. But fun part of the story was Canva had built this great product. They gave it away free to the masses, and they built this amazing, PLG flywheel through that. It was largely aimed at consumers, but the thought was that, over time, if consumers used it, then small businesses who didn't have access to design resources would start to use it more. And that was where they kind of made their way into the SMB. And lo and behold, what they found was that people started to take it to work. It was being, showing up at big companies like Microsoft, Amazon, you name XYZ big company. Teams, 30, 40, 50 people were signing up kind of overnight and starting to use the tool. And so it was a great moment for them to realize that they did have a need for an enterprise product offering. They were being largely led there by their customers. And so it was, time for them to think about, like, should we create a new offering, a new product that was suited and fit for moving into the enterprise space? Should we build a sales team? If you want to go after that audience, you can do it only so much with the PLG motion. And so when does it make sense to bring in a sales-led mission on top of that to really help enable that buying journey, help those customers buy more effectively, and start to use their platform? And so, they were looking to me to say, how do we open up, a new area of the world for us? We were seeing a lot of buying, already happening in North America. Majority of their customers were here. EMEA was next. And that was one of the things that they were thinking about, who can come in and help us, begin that march of opening up some of these new areas and markets. So it really, I would say in a lot of ways, all of a sudden began to fit my skill set, because it was, taking a product up market, going after new customers. It just started in the consumer, first, but it was now moving, in a place that I knew really well and understood the challenges that they were going to face.
It's interesting to me in the journey that there's actually two different pieces that you were getting a chance to start up. It was not just their first office in North America, but it was also their first sales team going up market to these enterprise customers.
It was, yeah. So it was a lot of new for them. At a time that there was, a lot of chaos going on in the world there too. So it was a lot of change on top of change on top of change. And, helping, I'd say the company, the founders, everybody, really understand what it meant to sell to businesses. Because I think that does take some changing of your DNA to be able to shift and pivot to that audience. I can share all sorts of great stories of things that I learned as I went through that, but, helping them figure that out while learning like the nuances of different, kind of markets and things like, what holidays do Americans take off? Like, I actually had to laugh before they hired me. They set up our payroll system and they Googled, what holiday should we give the US team, because we don't know which ones they take off. And so, that first year before I kind of got in place, I think we had some ones that I'd never gotten off before, because, whoever did the Google search, landed on that. But I think just helping them understand, how to get into these new markets, what that involves, what that entails, while learning how to sell to a new customer and launch a new product.
I'm curious your perspective on having gone through it with Canva as a local, opening up the local office. Do you have an opinion on, which one works better, if there is an advantage to, say, if you're coming into America, hiring an American versus hiring or taking an American and having them go sell to, the UK market?
Yeah, no, I think there's a a lot to what you just asked there. I do think like you need to lean on a local whenever you're thinking about tackling a new market. Like I think that's something that I highly recommend. I mean, every time that we opened up new markets or new offices, we would hire somebody in market who had, kind of really a good understanding of how to build and set up that kind of, I'd say initial groundswell. So in my past, we hired an MD in EMEA, a gentleman that I've worked with a few times, and it was fun to actually, work with this person because they could come in and help us navigate some of just the nuances to get things started. So kind of the inverse of me, I would hire a me, in those new markets as you're going into them there. But then I'd also like heavily seed and support, with folks from North America. So we created like a rotation of like some of our best sellers and gave them the ability to go over and like help with hiring, help with onboarding, help with, kind of getting the, initial practices and things up and running. And so you get that good mix of, someone who knows the area and understands the region and understands some of the pitfalls and traps that you could, kind of find yourself in, while enabling them with someone who understands like the company and the culture and the things that they want to build. And I think, getting those things right together is really important, because I think if you pick one or the other, right, you over-index in ways that might kind of make this more challenged, right? If you sent a whole pack of, North Americans to Australia to open up an office, I think that might not land as well, right? And vice versa. So I think it's important to have like the right elements of like culture, that's crossing over from office to office, process and understanding of the product, that's going from office to office, as well as like bringing in a regional expert when it makes sense.
What was the product mix, or what was the mix of like sales, marketing, PLG when you started at Canva, and help me understand what that evolves to? Yeah.
So I was the first sales hire and head of sales at Canva. And so, it was a real kind of fun time to come in. I think they had a few folks that had kind of been, assembled as part of the team and maybe had been hired around the same time. But I would say like we represented, I'd say like probably 1% of the overall population, which is so interesting and not like any time I've been at a B2B company, right? And so when you're at a, largely, kind of, consumer-led PLG growth company, your predominant kind of like cultures are going to be like engineering and products. Design was massive for us. But I do remember when I showed up, it was almost like being a stranger in a strange land in a lot of ways, which was not characteristic to, any place I'd ever been before, which was, I think, another really fun part. And it's shifted and changed over time. Now they actually have a decent size kind of sales and success team now that, it's been kind of 3 or 4 years, since that time I joined. And they've grown and evolved and really built a world-class offering for, kind of enterprise and B2B. But I would say like now it's representative of probably like I'd say 10 to 15% of the population, which is still lower than most, but it also represents, kind of how they're shifting and changing. And I bet that, if you looked at a pie graph over time, you'd see that slice of the pie just continue to get bigger and bigger, as they continue to see more growth in all these different areas.
I heard you say your first hires were local experts. You probably were the local Austin expert. Yeah. In this example. Who were your next hires when you're back from Sydney, Australia? You're making these hires. Who were the first folks that you brought on to help you build this team out?
Yeah, so it was an interesting one, and this is a great story for any folks that are kind of going through this journey, because I think it's different than if I were just to be the first sales hire at a company that just found product market fit, or was just bringing a product to market. It would be a different sequence. We had this great interesting challenge that we had 50 million monthly active users. So we had this massive user base
only.
Yeah, larger than some countries. And it was really great to be able to like have that as your starting spot. And like I mentioned, there were some teams signing up at big companies, and so the story about enabling, a sales motion on top of this flywheel was like, how do we take those teams of 30, 40, 50 people that are at, big company XYZ that have started to use the product, and how do we start to align them to our enterprise offering? And so we hired actually CSMs to start with, which is kind of interesting. You predominantly would have hired like folks who go acquire customers in the beginning, but we had a different problem. We had customers probably oriented to the wrong product, right? So it's like, let's get a good subset of these customers that have already kind of self-selected and come on board. Let's align them to a CSM so that we can really, beef up and bolster their adoption and get them to talk about 10 other people that they want to invite to be a part of this project and like really scale it and grow it. So we built a quick team of CSMs, which I think was really helpful to capture this natural momentum we already had with these customers that were coming to us. And then we built out, kind of an AE structure to go on top of that too. And so it was the AEs now were, focused on how do we acquire more of these customers coming in, that may have signed up. And this is the kind of cool segmentation stuff you can do. But like somebody signed up, the night before that was at a big company, how do we reach out to them ASAP and start to talk to them about, getting them into a sales process and working with them in a way that embraces them, inviting their friends and other departments and, enabling their usage there. So we kind of had, two teams that layered on top of our PLG sign-up motion, one that was capturing teams that were already in place and growing them. And then, quickly the ones that were able to take the ones that were naturally coming to us in the beginning and then being able to say, okay, let's set them up the right way on the enterprise offering with the right tools training so that this thing can really kind of take off and go faster here.
I've had an experience selling free and I don't love it. I think it's actually harder to sell free because it's easier to say, when I say harder to sell free, I mean sell free products that you're not going to charge a customer for, because it's harder to get the customer to bite on the attention.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, do you think this was something that you would recommend a sales leader of a new, that's launching a new product, or do you think to try and sell free for 6 months, or was this just something that worked really well because the pandemic and it's not a good time to be asking Qantas for, any money whatsoever when they just laid off 20,000 people?
Yeah. I share your beliefs on free. I think there's an element of it where you can use it effectively, Carl, but I think like in broad strokes, I would say I 100% agree with you on it. It's largely a bit of this moment in time we were in, I have to say. And it was a helpful thing for us to do. And I don't know if if some of the variables were different, I might have chosen a different path here. But at that time, it was a great one for us to utilize. I will say to your point, though, just as we know, as long as you set the framework and the structure up and incentives and all the things to align with it, you can actually, see some fun things happen here. And so I think giving away free usage, I was quick to tease out that like, look, we're going to pay you on usage, but eventually I'm going to flip this metric to a, conversion rate, and I think the fear of that happening and people knowing that made it like, okay, let's not just cram a bunch of folks on here that we don't think are going to actually stay, right? Because that's going to hurt me down the road, right? So maybe the fear that it was going to be a potential outcome, making them aware of that. So don't go into it blindly thinking like, hey, free usage is immediately going to convert. I think I teased that out there. I will say too, I also enjoy watching human behaviors and setting the right parameters. Look, some of the sellers thought, hey, this will be really easy. Like I can do like 3 times this quota. Whenever a customer comes to me and says I'm interested in the product, they still wanted a sales experience. And so this one seller, as I listened to his calls and talked to him and coached him through, he was like, hey, check us out. Here's how we compare to the competition. But look, we're giving it away free right now for 6 months. So why don't you get on the platform and I can speak through the sales process, right? Basically just using sloppy process, right? And, he's like, the customer pumped the brakes and was like, no, like, I think I told you I'm evaluating you against 3 other, providers out there. And then, free, I love the analogy of it's free like a puppy, it still has a cost involved to it. Yeah. And so that customer in that moment realized like, hey, like for me to enable and train and get my team's attention to use this product, like it's not really free, right? And so I want to find the right solution. And so it was a great moment to watch and see and coach. And, I think we saw a couple of those where folks were like, this will be easy. And they're like, okay, Cred, I still have to sell even with free. And ironically too, I mean, just another, layer to this, but we also have a big presence in education. And so, the person that I hired to lead our, launch into education, education is largely free. And so I laughingly told this leader that I hired to sell to education, I was like, you got the easiest job in the company, right? You're selling free software, which we both laughed about, because it's not actually, I would say like his job, in fairness to Jason, who I hired, he's a legend at this and building these systems. He's like, look, even if it's given away free to get into a school system, you need to get through a really rigorous process of approvals. They have to make sure it's secure. People get very sensitive about things, especially their children. And so like, just because your software is free doesn't mean a school district is going to say, come on in and hook into our systems and just start, kind of doing what you want here. So he was like, I have to sell it probably even more so than your commercial reps, John. And so anyways, I agree with you, but I think there's certain nuances, or moments that might, kind of need this. And so I would just say, always kind of look at the task at hand and think about what the right solution is there.
You said something interesting about onboarding. You had to onboard 30, 40 folks to a new sales motion at a new company, a new office in a new way. You couldn't just fly them out and go have the sellers. You couldn't just have the previous sellers intermingle because there were no previous sellers.
Yep. 2,
you can't go and have them in front of the product people because you're barred from leaving the country, entering their country. How did you onboard 30, 40 folks virtually? That sounds easy.
Yeah, I probably would have chosen a different word there, but yeah, it was interesting, and we all, had different elements of like having to figure it out. Probably in those moments, this one was a bit extreme, I will say. In fact, like the week after, kind of the dust had settled, and we realized the borders weren't going to open up. I think they actually said, "Hey, ship 50 laptops to John's house," and John's now taking on onboarding, and John has really been doing onboarding for a real long time. So lots of comic relief to be had here. But this office was actually where my home base was during that time. And, my kids kiddingly laughed and said, it looks like a Mac store in Dad's office. I mean, there was a stack of laptops as tall as you or I. There was, mice, keyboards, everything you need. Yeah. So it was a bit funny and touch and go. Yeah. And I think we, in the beginning, we improvised and overcame like everybody. I mean, I started to do kind of just regular morning stand-ups, which was just like a great practice when you have a small team that's forming in a chaotic time like that. And so it was just great to come together. And, I'd shipped out their laptops, I'd made sure they got set up, but then we would have just regular touch points, checkpoints. We made, Slack channels to make it really easy to kind of ask questions of each other and kind of work through this. And then we just kept evolving and making it better. And I think like the neat thing is, the first probably 10 got the unfortunate experience of being onboarded by John. But, after we got to, 10, we actually ended up hiring, someone to lead sales enablement here in the US who could take on training and build out a very, thoughtful module based, approach. It probably took, her about, I would say 6 to 9 months to get her kind of traction and bearing. But, when she did that, it made the next 10 easier. Over time, we ended up hiring an IT person here in the US because, the Australia and US time zones do not overlap, right? Like they begin their day when we end ours, right? There's a little bit of overlap. But that meant that usually a new hire's experience, prior was if they got their laptop shipped to them by John, and they couldn't log into a system, it's like just hang out till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock and someone in Sydney will help you get up and running, right? And if you had a problem, you had to wait. And so, it was nice actually when then we got IT help here, and system support here, we were able to actually run like a real kind of, business onboarding effectively in this new region. And it was so great for me to hand off some of these experiences to other folks because they immediately got better overnight. It was like, I'm going to hold down the fort until we can get an expert in. And then once we get an expert in, this thing really takes off.
I'm curious from a cultural perspective, creating culture, in a Zoom environment, we all did the Zoom games and sounds like you were having the kind of daily stand-ups. What was your experience, trying to create the culture and kind of set the tone through a Zoom? Like, were there specific things that worked really well? Some things didn't work. Yeah. I'd love to understand that piece.
Yeah. I would say like one thing that's really kind of neat is Canva does have an amazing culture. Like that's one of their kind of strengths right now. And they do a good job, they did a good job prior to the pandemic of like really getting people bought into it because they'd bring everybody together and they'd have these, what they called season openers. So instead of quarters, they go by seasonal calendar. And so every season they would open up with this, kind of kickoff, and it was an all day event and there was costumes and it was a lot of fun. And so thankfully I got to experience it. I will say like one thing I am happy. I think if I had more runway and more time, we would have been so much better off. 100% agree. But I do think at least getting some, viewpoint into the culture, being a part of some of these cultural elements was great. And then when we went remote, like they supported us really well. And they did, because everybody was distributed even in Australia. And so they would do these events and they would send gift boxes to everybody's house and they had, the themes, and we even did kind of costume based, in the kind of a Zoom situation there. And so look, they they made it fun and they made it, helpful to stay engaged with a lot of support from, outside. And I understood what they were gearing towards. And so I think that was helpful for us to build towards. I think that's the macro culture though, Colin. And I think like then when you think about like doing this hard work of building a new region, look, there's elements of micro culture, right? And it is like, it has to really, it can't be in opposition to the macro culture, but it also is like, how do you respect some of the nuances of this new place that you come into? How do you tie in those elements, and how do you, respect the macro, but also, put your own fingerprints on it. So it was fun to be a part of getting to build that out. And, thinking about that, I think some of the things that we were able to do over time as the world became, a little bit more opened up here was that, those season openers were done in Australia time zone. So they were done largely at like 8 o'clock sometimes, in the US. So it was a little bit of an uncomfortable or, tough situation for the 3 or 4 that we did, prior to getting some critical mass, because it meant that people were staying up to like 2 a.m. to be on a company meeting, right? That's like from 8 to 2 a.m. Would you mind doing it? Bring the energy and bring the noise, right? But then it got to be really fun because we shifted the time, we were able to come together, kind of about 2 years in, as restrictions and vaccines and everything kind of became more available. And we would do like watching parties, right? And so we were able to tap into the culture and be a part of it and do it in like, cool Austin places, and then go to California to be, we ended up actually opening up a hub in California, doing it with the California team. And so we found ways to facilitate kind of moments of connection, through this and build on, the culture while tapping into it. So it was, it was definitely a art form to figure out. And I think there's probably a version of this where, the founders came over and, if I hadn't had that attachment, they might've come over and said like, this is not at all like our company, but they came over and kind of said, this feels a lot like us. You all did a good job of really, matching and mirroring and doing the things that are important to you, but also important to us here.
When you were deciding between like, I'd say maybe marketing led, PLG, sales led, what did the math look like? How did you work out, okay, what's going to be profitable for each sales motion? Or was it just, we'll throw some AEs at it and it doesn't matter if it's a 1 and 2, the AE can still close it. Like how did you work out those kind of rules of engagement, this sort of math behind the strategy of what types of reps we're going to do and what type of sales motion we're going to have?
Yeah, look, that's the important part. And it's not as hard as I'll make it. I mean, it definitely took some financial engineering to get there. But I would say, we quickly established like there's certain things that should have a sales touch and there's certain things that should never have a sales touch. And so like, the thought was, a consumer like you or I signing up to use the free platform, to create an Instagram post for a partner's birthday probably never needs a sales touch. Like let them do, do their thing. Consumers should consume, SMBs as well. We tried to think about like, how do we do a very scaled approach to that where it's like, let's give them access to webinars. So if you are, my wife opens up a cupcake shop and she wants to have it to be able to build social media posts and be able to create flyers and store signage, like give her access to workshops and training, but never really touch it with the salesperson. We started out kind of setting some parameters of what got a sales touch. And it was typically, what we assessed was kind of like the mid-market all the way up to like the Fortune 1000, right? And we created sub-segments in there, but I would say like we didn't want, sellers touching a company that was less than, I think we started with 100 employees and we quickly moved it up to about 250, just to say, okay, like what are the ones that we really think need that touch, need that help, need that guiding? And so for us, that was kind of the beginning of it, is if you were a company that was 200 employees and above, you got a sales touch and you were on a salesperson's radar possibly here. But other stuff never got touched. And I think there's other things that we did, we built in, this is becoming more popular with companies like Calendly, who've done really great things on this. But product advocates, which are folks that kind of almost become your SDRs, working through those millions and millions of users because they're reaching out to them, they're offering coaching sessions, they're talking to them. And if it is a, one person, so if it's Colin or John who signed up at, 1,000-person company, they want to make sure Colin or John, even though I'm just one person paying $9 a month, gets access to some really cool things, gets access to the parts of the platform you need to know about. So maybe do some lightweight training. And if there's interest or signaling, how do you be able to get them to a salesperson right away? Right. So, those were the kind of really neat kind of needles in the haystack for us to find. And so, you kind of build this lightweight kind of teaching, training, enabling, I'd say somewhat customer success, kind of role that's able to kind of work with some of these bigger companies that are kind of hiding in that, in that big, big haystack there.
From there was the COVID kind of paused everything. Then there was the government stimulus kind of rebound and, the associated kind of funding that went alongside it. 2022 seemed to be the year where everybody's like, hey, maybe we should reconsider this growth at all cost mindset. I'm curious what you've seen in, from a buying behavior perspective in the last 2 years.
Yeah, look, and we've talked a bit about this through conversations too, but I think during that time, PLG became really exciting to everybody. And I think everybody probably over-indexed a lot on PLG, and I think now there's lots of stuff coming up around is PLG, all it's cracked up to be. I still believe it belongs in everybody's, kind of tool set in some way, shape, or form. And it largely, to me feels like it's a great tool in B2B as a way to acquire customers, get them to engage and have interest with your platform. But you are seeing, I think some more shifting even on top of that. I do think obviously it's getting tougher and tougher to sell. I've been through, a few of these kind of dips in sales recessions and you have as well. And so, this one's got some unique nuances in it. I would say this year has elements of what I saw in the past, but I think it also has elements that are completely different. And I think we're finding that decisions are taking longer than they ever have. Budget is getting harder to find. I think indecision and uncertainty just hanging over everybody's head is like the big one that I see. I just see so many deals that were a right fit for today that customers, the customer said, I need it, I want it, but the deals aren't just getting done because everybody just doesn't know what's going to happen next, right? Especially if you're in tech, which seems to be really, kind of feeling still kind of impacted and very volatile right now. And so I think there is a lot to this. I think the smartest sellers are the ones that kind of understand and show up and realize, how the world is shifting, and they change their tactics immediately and change their strategies to be more empathetic, show up with more heart, be, there for their customers too. I think thinking about how do you grow customers more effectively, if customer acquisition is a little bit stunted right now. So how do we rebalance some of those resources? And I think it's, it's going to make for a much better seller. It needed to happen. I think actually, you've seen this, I'm sure you've heard from many of your guests the last year or two, had so much volatility in bad ways too. It was just incredibly, out of whack at times. I remember, seeing or hearing this. And so I think we're in a bit of the reset or recoil phase here, and hopefully it'll be better. And I do have a strong belief that tough times don't last, but tough people do. So I think it's got to be the mantra everybody's evoking as we kind of soldier through this.